So let's go ahead and set up a constructor. For this example, we'll just go ahead and do one constructor that takes in 6 parameters for all of our controls. And so a constructor is what actually makes the object. So I said a moment ago, you think of a class as a design, the design of an object that we will use in our code. And whenever we use that in our code, the constructor is the method that we're going to ask for a new version of. We're going to say new, and the name has to match the class name. So for constructor, we just say, put the name of the class, and we don't have to have a return type. It's a strictly typed language, so every method that's not a constructor does have to have a return type. But well, really, our return type is an instance of the basic control unit that we're designing here. So it needs to match the name of the class, and then in parentheses, we will say what values are going to be passed in, or we could leave that empty. Well, at this point, we can't really leave that empty. But we can say what is going to be passed in when somebody asks for a new base control unit in Arduino code. And then we are just declaring the method. When we write the method over in the C++ file in a moment, we'll use some curly braces to say what's going to happen in that constructor. But right now we're just saying we have a constructor, so we don't need the curly braces to indicate a block of code that goes with that. We need the end of instruction line. Just we have a constructor. And in this case, our basic constructor is going to take in integers for all of those, and we'll just pass in the pin numbers that we're connecting it to. So I'm going to start with the joystick. So I'm just going to move left to right on the picture of the controller. Moving left to right, the first thing we get is the joystick, so we'll pass in. So for our constructor, we need an integer called x. That's our first parameter, and an integer called y for the joystick. Integer called a, integer called b, an integer called c, and an integer called d. So we'll just pass in all our parameters in the constructor, and then when we ask for a new one of these things, we pass in the pin numbers, and then it will put those into these values, and then the other file will explain to the computer what to do with them. And now, notice I was anxious to mark out the oxygen comment. What I'm getting ready to put here is probably the most common. We'll see the one of the two most common keywords that you'll use in your oxygen comments. So first, a quick description. This is the constructor for the class. Just a very short description. And well, we said we need 6 things, and when we use them, we call them parameters. So we need 6 parameters for our constructor. And when we ask for a new one, we pass in arguments to fill those parameters. Just a technical term, but we have these parameters, so we want to mark those in our documentation. That way, if somebody goes to use this library, they'll know what the parameters are and what they do. So we use the keyword @param. And then the first word will show up in bold, and then the rest of the words in this line will describe what that parameter is for. So our first parameter is x, and then the description is the x-axis pin from the joystick. And we'll need that same thing for all of them. So the next parameter, so @param y, is the y-axis pin from the joystick. Param a, I don't know why I was putting that dash there. I don't really need that. The parameter A, and again, the first thing after param will be in bold, and then the rest of that will just be regular text afterwards. A is the first action button, not control, action button in connection, which that line can then copy for the rest of them. I'll copy that asterisk too. Copy B, C, D. And something about coding, notice how those lines are all very similar. Everything lines up. It's actually more productive to work down than it is to work across, because you don't have to keep changing your train of thought. So we can just go through here and do the same thing over and over again whenever you hit spots like this. So A, B, C, D. And what's the next thing that needs to change? So A is the first, and then working down to make those changes, we don't have to keep changing our mindset. We just change it once, do all this. Change it again, do all this. So first, second, third, fourth. Whoops, not how to spell fourth. And that, it shows up a lot when we're writing code, that we're going to have a bunch of lines next to each other that look very similar like that. And it is much more productive to work down than it is to work across. Another one of those things you don't see when all you look at is the final example. So there's the constructor and the parameters. So then we'll ask for a new one of these and just pass in the pin numbers we need to fill these data fields. So we need a couple more methods. We also need an initialization method, because we can't set our pin mode when we first create it. We have to set our pin mode either in the setup or the loop method in the Arduino IDE. I like to do it in the setup if possible. If it's not going to change, I like to do it in the setup. So I'm going to go ahead and create a method and call it begin. So there will not be a return type. It's not sending anything back. And call it begin. And it does not need any parameters. So not sending anything back, not taking anything in, and we're going to call it begin. That's just the standard term to use for the initialization method in Arduino. And then a brief description of it for the documentation, so that doesn't get away from us. Initialization method to call in Arduino setup function. And what I just typed here, this actually isn't going to work because parentheses mean something to Oxygen. So in order to type parentheses, we need the escape sequence. So if we actually want a parenthesis to show up, we have to do backslash parenthesis, backslash parenthesis. So we need the escape sequence. And then we don't have any parameters to pass in. And then the rest of these, well, we aren't going to change these values after we create them. Nothing in the software is going to unhook the yellow button from pin 4 where it's currently hooked up and hook it up somewhere else. So these values don't need change, so we won't need any setters, but we will need some getters, some getter methods. So I'm going to make a method, a getter method, and what are we getting? Well, whenever we ask for it, we're going to read the values. So we're going to digital read the yellow button, that'll be a 0 or a 1, or we're going to analog read our X and Y axis, which will also be an integer. So whichever one we're reading, we are going to return an integer from our get method. And I'll just go in order. So create a method called get A. And in order to ask for the value, well, the digital read part will be included when we get over the C++ .cpp file. So we don't need to send in any arguments to ask for it, so we don't have any parameters to fill. So it doesn't need to take anything in, but it's going to send back an integer. And that's another keyword here. digital read of the first action button. And the other keyword that we use a lot, most often along with parameter, is going to be return. So we need at return, what is it sending back? And this method promises to send back an integer. So it's sending back an integer, which will be a 0 when the button is not being pressed, or a 1 when the button is being pressed. I guess I could use the regular 0 instead of that. And it looks like all of our getters are going to be this exactly the same. So I'll just copy this and change that to the B, C, and D. All right, so select all that. Control C to copy here in the text editor. B, C, D, X, Y. So copy all of them down. And once again, it's an identical thing. So it's a lot more productive to not, to think about what we're going to change and then make that same change in all of them and then come back and do the next change. That way we're not changing our mind 10 times. So like here, not all of the methods are digital read, so that'll need change. So there's one thing. Return int. Some of them are not, might say joystick instead of button for this sentence will need changed in the other one. So that's two things they'll need changed. The int, but all of them are returning an int, not taking in any parameters, going to have the word get, but this letter is going to change, so that's three things. So we change our mind 3 times, going across in order like we would an English sentence, but if we go down, we think about what needs changed. So this first word might need changed. Go down here, and it only needs changed on the X and the Y, so I'll go ahead and do those. And log read. And log read. And now what's the next thing that needs changed? Digital read of the first action button. This word. So it might not be the first action button. So change the mind 1 time and then do all of them. So here we have the second action button, the third action button, the fourth action button of the joystick x-axis, joystick y-axis. And notice how the mind doesn't have, we're not changing our mind back and forth constantly. We change it once, make all those changes. Then think about the next thing to change, and then make all those changes. And it can be a lot more efficient to set up your code that way. So what's next? Return a 0 or 1. So that's going to change when, for the x-axis, so it's the same on all the buttons. Same there, same there, same there. So on the last two, return a value between -100 and +100 to represent percent in given direction. Something like that, and I will just copy that for the other return. Something like that, just a vague description. We can clean that up later. Just kind of getting started, and notice if we're going to do the full out documentation with the website automatically generated for us, we don't want that to get ahead of us. As you can see here, there's more comments than there is code in this file. But this is where all the comments go for this. There's no comments in the CPP file or in the keywords file, so we're almost done with those. But you can see there is a lot of them to get those websites together. So what's next? Get A. So that A is going to change. So we come down here and get B, get C, get D. And notice how it even looks like the same, clicking on the same spot over and over again makes it easier to see. Get X and get Y. So just something that can be a lot more efficient in a case that shows up quite often. And I think that's all we need for this. We have our pin numbers, and then we have a way to access them. And when we get over the CPP file, we'll actually describe to the computer how to access them. And before we do that, though, let's put all this into our keywords file. That way they'll change colors. So our class overall, the basic control unit. Well, that one, probably want that to be a nice bold orange so it stands out. So that's our first one up here in the data type section. We'll just paste that in. Then the constructor, the word begin, I'll go ahead and put that in there, but that's kind of the standard to call our initialization begin whenever we do a microcontroller project. So that is definitely a word that our IDE already knows about. But I'll copy it anyway. And then we have our get methods. So get a, control copy, paste that in there. And so far I've been using control C and control V to paste. If you're not familiar with it, in most text editors, we also have duplicate, which is control D, as in duck, control D to duplicate a line. So put your cursor at the end of the line, A, B, C, D, X, Y. And then we can just scroll down here and change those values. X, Y. So that's all the keywords that we'll need to change colors, because this stuff down here is private, so it's not going to be accessible from over in the Arduino IDE. And yeah, so I think that finishes it up for that. The .h, the header file, where we do all our declarations. It's like we say everything we have in our design. And the keywords just go with the IDE here. That just tells it what color to change the color of those words. That way we can see when we make a typo if it doesn't change colors or something. Now we're ready to describe what happens when we do all this. And we don't have any more of the comments to make because all the comments go with the declarations, not with the instructions themselves for the methods. So let's jump over to the .cpp file and fill that out. Or we'll do the .cpp file in just a second. I might have forgot something important while I was talking. Yep, I sure did. So all of this is just a comment that tells us what that section is. We actually have to say it's a keyword 1. So after basic control unit, we can hit tab and in all caps type keyword 1. Whoops, keyword 1. We have to say that keyword. So tab over, and this is going to be a keyword 2. And then I'll just copy this down with the tab. Control copy, paste, 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 paste. So yeah, sorry about that. We do have to say what type of keyword it is because these are just comments labeling the sections. And I think I mentioned earlier, I just copy and paste this over and over again. So everything that you have in the libraries your Arduino IDE knows about should have a keywords text file. So you can just go to the libraries for your Arduino. Wherever you have the libraries for your Arduino, pretty much everything in there should have a keywords text file in it. So you can just copy from there for the first one and just copy and paste them. They're all very similar, and just any words you want to change colors, make sure you say type the word, a tab, and then type keyword 1, keyword 2, or literal, depending on which color you want it to change to. So now we're ready for the .cpp file. So first thing we want to do here is go ahead and include any other libraries we might need. So, well, here we are most definitely going to be doing Arduino stuff, so definitely want to make sure to include Arduino.h library, which used to be called wire.h. So if you see like old reference material, if you see something that says wire.h, that's been renamed at some point. I can't remember when it was renamed, but those are the same thing. So we'll need the Arduino library. And, well, the next one probably seems obvious to us, but remember, nothing is obvious to a computer. We need this header file we just created. So we have to make sure and include that as well. So also include basic control unit.h. So even though that probably seems obvious to us, remember, nothing seems obvious to a computer. I think that's the only libraries we'll need. If another one shows up, we'll come back and add it in. So now we can add in those methods we created. So we don't have to say anything about our integers because the computer at this point knows it has integers to work with. But we do have to say like what's going to happen in our constructor. So I'm going to take this and copy it over, everything except the semicolon, because over on this side, we do want the curly braces. So there at the end, an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace, and we'll define what happens in between. And it's often a good idea to label the closing curly braces. So in constructor, because those are going to add up. And well, if you write your code like I do, where this curly brace is at the end of that line, and it's quite noticeable, but this curly brace at the very end might be on its own, and it's easy to get lost in those standalone curly braces at the end. So we want this method, but we do have to say what object that method belongs to. So we'll come put our cursor at the beginning of the line, and that is in our base control unit, and then a couple colons. So the base control unit object, the base control unit constructor, with 2 colons between them. And that's another one of those cases I put it together in the order my mind thinks about it in, which isn't the top to bottom, left to right order like you would. If you look at a finished example, you might try to go through it that way. So remember, our minds don't think in the same way a computer processes. So it can be a lot more efficient and productive to jump around and put the code together in the order our mind thinks, and just make sure it's in the order the computer needs it at the end. So what do we need to do in our constructor? Well, we're taking in parameters for each of our variables, so we will just assign those. There could be a slight issue though here. Notice the first parameter we bring in is x. And we're going to use that to fill our data field called x. So if we just wrote that, we'd have x is assigned x, which is a bit ambiguous because the computer is not going to be able to tell the difference in which one we meant where. So here we need that really great word. We need to disambiguous this. We need to clear out that ambiguity, and we do it with the keyword this. So we'll say this x, and this refers to the object we're in. So base control unit's x is going to be assigned this x that we passed in. And that clears up the ambiguity about that. And notice the arrow type operator. So that's how we'll need that to refer to these attributes of our base control unit. refer to the attributes with this little arrow operator. So this, and then that, the arrow, and then the data field about it. And the one without the this keyword refers to this. And now once again, all these lines are going to look the same, so I'm just going to hit Control D a few times. So X, Y, A, B, C, D, and come down and change those. X, Y, A, B, C, D. Y, A, B, C, D. And so that way, we could have also just called it something different when we passed it in. But a lot of times doing it this way, it makes it a little clearer what data field it's filling in. So we can just add in that keyword to clear it up or call it something different at this point. Either way, the choice is up to you. But we'll set up all of our methods the same way. So what's the next on the list? So after the constructor, we had this void begin method. So I'll copy over everything except the semicolon, paste that in, put some curly braces in, label this closing curly brace so I don't get lost in curly braces anywhere. And well, the method's going to return a void, but we have to say what object to look at in order to find the begin method. So we want the base control unit object and the begin method out of that. And then this is going to be essentially what we did in the setup here. All of this, the pin mode for what's now called A, B, C, and D, and X and Y. So we're going to set the pin mode, and we know about this file will know about pin mode method because we imported the library that comes from. So we're going to set the pin mode of X to an input, and all of these are going to be like that. So I'll just hit duplicate again. So X, Y, A, B, C, D, and the only thing that changes is this A, B, C. Whoops. Y, A, B, C, D. So you can see that repetitiveness is something that happens a lot when we do code. So what's left? The getter method. So return an integer called get A. So we'll copy that over. Come down a couple lines, paste that in, replace that semicolon with curly braces, and label this closing one so we don't get lost in stray curly braces at some point. And all we need to do for this is to read the value of the pin. So we saw that instruction over here, digital read, which again is in the Arduino.h library. So it'll know about that. And what pin are we reading? So we can just go ahead and return that. So return digital read of pin A. And then all of our getters and setters are going to look like that. So I'm just going to pause the video and copy that. There's no need to see that. Oh, one other change though. Over in the header file, if nothing's being passed in, we do have to say it's going to be void. But in the CPP file, we just leave that empty if it's a void. And once again, we have to say what object that goes to. So base control unit get A method is just going to return a digital read on that pin. And then the only change is the get X and get Y will return an analog, will return the mapped analog read. Yeah, actually, the other ones I'm going to copy directly from here. So the X and Y will be that. So I'm going to pause the video. There's no need to watch me copy and paste for a moment and then be right back. So just a whole lot of copy and paste to get that together. Change to the right, just change the letter for it. And then this, I just copied directly from right here for the X and change that to the X and the Y, what we called them over here in the object. So that should be it for the C code. But we need to compile it and check that and run it and do a quick test. And we can just use the compiler over in the Arduino IDE. So Now we're ready to come over here and import that.